achieved success on battlefields in France, in Crécy and Poitiers. And now finally, our French adversary is on his knees, yet he still resists. So our noble King Edward has decided a show of strength is required. A demonstration of our resolve and iron should bring them quickly to heel. Now it is our task to ensure we have the appropriate armaments, should we cross the Channel once again. So it is necessary for us to test our machines of war. So I present to you one of the biggest, most powerful siege engines in the world, the Warwick Castle Trebuchet!
Woo!
Now the crew of this engine stand ready to begin their job of loading. So what is required from you is a show of authority, to get some fire in their bellies. So after 3, I want you to shout havoc at the crew. 1, 2, 3!
Havoc!
Havoc, as loud as you can. 1, 2, 3!
Havoc!
And off they go to do their job. So, this here is Ursa, Latin for the bear. And Ursa stands at 18 meters tall and weighs a colossal 22 tons. Now, the bulk of the engine is built from English oak, which is thick, heavy, dense wood, perfect for all of the framework. And the throwing arm is formed from 2 ash trees, which is light, flexible wood, excellent to flick projectiles at a great distance. Now, not only do we boast this engine at being one of the biggest and most powerful in the world, she is also state-of-the-art in trebuchet design, meaning we can load this engine in 2 different ways. The first way, the traditional way of loading trebuchets, a tow down. So with a rope tied to the end of the throwing arm, you can pull it down. Now this job was originally given to soldiers. They collectively would use their strength to pull down the throwing arm, and it worked. But as the centuries rolled on, trebuchets become more powerful and far too difficult for mere soldiers to tow down the arm. So this job was given to beasts of burden, powerful animals like horses and oxen. They would be harnessed to a tow rope and they would herd in that direction, towing down the throwing arm. And this method worked for a time. But there was a few niggling problems with this method. It was time consuming. It also had tied up a lot of men to look after these animals. But this is a siege engine used to attack castles and cities, and this is not done quickly. It takes us weeks, months, or in some cases years to achieve. Now, during that time, your enemy could find many different ways to defend themselves. But one of them would use their allies. Now, they could send out word to their allies to cut off all roads leading towards the castle. Now, this is good for them, but bad for us, because none of our supply trains will be able to get through to us. No supplies, no food, and hungry soldiers are not reasonable people. We must feed them. They'll do one of 2 things, cause an uprising or simply desert us. Either way, we cannot have that happen. We must have a fighting force, so we must feed them. The only way we can do this is slaughter any animals that we have for their meat, to fill the bellies of those soldiers. So in this case, yes, we will have a fighting force, but no way of loading our trebuchets. So in this case, you may as well just pack up and leave. Now this was the case until somebody somewhere thought of using crane technology to load trebuchets. Why not use technology used for construction in its destruction? Well, they also take some inspiration from the original method of loading trebuchets using manpower. So we turn to the cranes, as they are excellent, useful tools to lift heavy sandstone into position with wheeled pulley systems. Now these wheeled pulley systems have a person walking inside. This gives the ability to lift those heavy pieces of sandstone into position whilst constructing towers and walls, etc. Now this is perfect for trebuchets of this size. So our trebuchet has 2 crane wheels linked with a central axle. Tow rope tied to the end of the arm is passed through a pulley at the back, then connected to the central axle. Then all we need is a bit of manpower. So we have 4 soldiers, 2 to go inside each wheel, and their job is simple, to walk within those wheels. Now they walk towards the back of the machine, turning the wheels, which turns the axle, tightening that rope around the axle, therefore pulling down the throwing arm. And on the throwing arm at the base, you see that box that hangs in the center. That is the source of the energy of our trebuchet. It is the counterweight. Now, that counterweight oak box weighs 1 ton when it's empty. We have filled it with almost 5 ton of rocks. So you have just witnessed 4 people, through their labor of walking, lifting almost 6 ton of weight. So I think they deserve a massive cheer. Come on! So the arm is now down and is locked off by the trebuchet master. The trebuchet master is the person in charge. That's her at the back there. Her job to oversee the construction and operation of this engine. The trigger is simply a metal hook attached to the A-frame at the back. This has been passed through a metal loop which is on the throwing arm. So the arm is brought down in line with the A-frame and the hook passes through the loop. That is our trigger. But to ensure we don't accidentally pull the trigger and launch members of our crew flying, we have secured it with 2 safety implements. First of all, a metal pin is pushed underneath the hook, and then a chain is led from the base and hooked to the end of the arm. So when we want to pull the trigger, we've got to take off the chain, pull out the pin, then we can pull the trigger. And it needs to be locked down, for as you can see, the job of the winders is not over yet. They have been ordered to split into 2 teams. 1 winder from each wheel has stepped out to operate a brake at the front, which is simply an 8-foot piece of oak slipped under each wheel. There is now 1 winder in each wheel, and they walk on for a second time, this time towards the front of the machine. Now, the reason why they have to get back inside the wheels and walk the other way is because of that rope used to pull down the throwing arm and lift the counterweight. All of that rope is now coiled tight around the central axle. So if you were to pull the trigger at this stage, we would destroy the trebuchet, ripping out the axle, uncoupling the wheels, and seriously injuring those crew members. So they walk on for a second time to unravel that rope, clearing it from the axle so we have a free-flying arm. Now, this does make life inside the wheels rather uncomfortable. In fact, being a trebuchet winder is regarded as one of the worst jobs you can get because it's so tough and so demoralizing. Now, when you're inside the wheels and you're walking in that direction, it's slow. You not only have to walk the weight of the wheel, you've got to lift that incredible weight. So you've got to constantly climb inside the wheels. It's like walking up an ever-increasing hill. But at least you have a partner inside, struggling along with you. But at this stage of the wind, it is a different story altogether. First of all, the winders are on their own. Only 1 winder is needed per wheel because all of the weight is locked off at the trigger. So they walk on and they can actually get the wheels moving quite quickly. In fact, some winders attempted to run inside the wheels. Now, this is not a good idea. You don't want to go too fast in a wheel that weighs just over a ton, because that 1 ton of weight will gain momentum and speed and eventually spin out of control. If it spins out of control, the winder will struggle to keep up the pace, and then they'll trip and fall. Now, you don't fall out of these wheels. You stay inside. You tumble around inside that wheel, hitting that central axle every few seconds and breaking your back. So this is why we have those brake operators at the front. They communicate with the winders in each wheel, making sure that they keep a safe, steady pace. Now, you're probably wondering what the banging's all about inside the wheel. It's because the wedges that hold the wheels in place have been coming loose recently because of the very hot weather we've been having. But with a rap of the hammer from the trebuchet master, we are now back underway. Now, falling in the wheels due to them going quickly is not the only risk. On bright sunny days, some winders succumb to a form of motion sickness known as trebuchet sickness. Now, trebuchet sickness is brought on through the sunlight shining through the gaps in the wheels. As the wheels rotate, the outer slats will cause a flickering of light flashing in their eyes. Now, this does a few things. It's quite hypnotic to some of the winders. They can't help but stare at it. So then after a few minutes, they start to feel dizzy. Then they start to feel nauseous, and then they throw up inside the wheel. This is not a good idea. To throw up in an environment when the floor is the ceiling every few seconds. It's going to go everywhere, isn't it? All in your clothes, all in your hair. And of course, it's disgusting and it's dangerous because it's going to coat the entire inside of the wheel, making the surface slippery. The winder will slip and fall, and their fate is sealed. They will slip and fall, hitting that central axle, breaking their back. So, how do you combat trebuchet sickness? Well, it's quite simple. What we do is we threaten all of our winders with a dagger to the eyes. If they succumb to the sickness, we take their eyes from their face, so it doesn't happen again, for they cannot see the flickering light. In fact, blind winders were recruited, and they were superb winders. They cannot see the flickering light, so therefore we had an efficient team to take to siege. But as you can see, it's a very good deterrent, as the winding process is complete and our crew retreat for a well-deserved rest. So why do we use trebuchets in siege when we have cannon that can do the same kind of job but a lot quicker? Well, cannons can create a breach in a city wall, which is perfect. But once that breach is met, you then have to send in soldiers to fight through the gap, through the streets and in the buildings of that city. Now, the problem with this kind of warfare is the fact you have to be prepared to lose a lot of your men. Perhaps half of your force won't survive. Now, Ursa gives us another option, because not only with trebuchets can you launch projectiles at city walls, you can launch them over the walls, leave them standing, and attack inside, making life for the inhabitants a living hell, so they surrender. So, what can you throw from the trebuchet? Well, from one of this size, you can throw anything. Rocks, fire, people, dead animals, anything. A dead animal is a very good choice if you want to fight a dirty war and spread disease through the streets. So you throw in the rotten carcasses of cows and horses, hit their water supply, and they have to surrender. And of course, there is a bit of psychological warfare as well. If you capture any enemy soldiers, well, then you cut off their heads, load them into baskets, and shoot them from the trebuchet. Cascade their heads home where they came from. Show your enemy that you take no prisoners, and it's their heads that will be next if they don't surrender themselves. But the one thing medieval man feared the most was fire, as all of their homes are made of wood and thatch. So you can send fireballs flying from our trebuchet, giving your enemy a very simple choice. You surrender or you burn. Now, with Ursa being so tall and so powerful, she is ideal for the bombardment of city walls and buildings. So we will be demonstrating our trebuchet by throwing an 18-kilogram rock using slingshot. Our trebuchet master is now at the back of the machine, ready to begin the shooting sequence. First, she removes the chain. And now, with a steady hand, she pulls the pin from under the trigger. Pin is removed. The trebuchet is now live and ready to launch. Our trebuchet master steps down to do her final checks and prepare herself, for she is eager to demonstrate the power of this engine, and you are about to witness this power, so you need to get involved and provide the command to pull the trigger. So we will count down from 10, and when we reach the end, we all shout loose, which is the command for our trebuchet master to unleash hell. So people of Warwick, tell me, are you all ready to count?
Yeah!
Come on, all of you could do better than that. Are you ready?
Yeah!
Well then, let's do this. 10, 9,
8, 7, 6, 5,
4, 3, 2, 1. Loose!
we launch! There she goes, throwing the rock over 150 miles an hour and clearing 200 meters. Incredible. Lords and ladies, the Warwick Castle Trebuchet!
Woo!
Now that is not achieved without an awful lot of hard work. So it is now time to fill your lungs and give a massive cheer to our trebuchet master and the crew!
Woo!
Excellent work, and what an incredible machine. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today. That is the last show we have for you today. Now, if you're staying with us in the Knights Village, have a wonderful stay.